All right, let's start off the discussion right now. It's the UN week. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, estimates that more than 1 million Nigerian children under the age of 5 are malnourished.
Many of them die each day due to acute hunger. Vivian Irekefe in this report takes a look at the causes of malnutrition in children and how to address it.
Many children in Nigeria live in unhygienic environments like this. We visited 3 communities at Apapa Igomu in Lagos, and it's the same appalling situation. The residents don't have access to decent sanitary facilities. They make do with makeshift bathrooms and toilets. Though they have government-approved maternity clinic, the children who are at the receiving end take their bath in the open and defecate openly, even on the walkway, while their playmates pass by. The regular sickness from mosquitoes, germs, and bacteria from the environment will obstruct the ability of children's digestive tracts to properly absorb nutrients from food they eat.
Gone are the days when we used to ask our children if they have eaten to their satisfaction. These days, we simply ask them, have you eaten?
My husband doesn't have a good job and my petty business is not profitable. My breast milk is not flowing well. I will soon stop breastfeeding this child because I'm equally hungry.
A lot of children are not receiving the nutrients that they need to grow and attain their full potential. The situation is worse in northeast Nigeria because of the lingering conflict. 1 out of every 3 child deaths globally is caused by malnutrition. More than 1 million Nigerian children are malnourished and many die every day. This is why proper nutrition for the first 1,000 days of life between pregnancy until the age of 2 is critical.
The first 1,000 days are very critical because that's primarily where the brain develops. So the nutrition and what that baby eats and their environment is crucial to how they're going to perform later in life.
Malnutrition is a huge problem, and nutrition plays a very central role in not only ensuring that the child develops properly, but also the child has the capacity to perform literacy and numeracy roles in schools and is able to learn better and is able to contribute to even the development of Nigeria as an adult.
In this clinic where mothers are reminded to exclusively breastfeed, some sneak out to feed their less than 3 months old with baby formula, guinea corn pudding, and sachet of water, the purity of which is not certain. The children here deserve a better life, but who will come to their aid? Vivian Irekefe, TVC News.
All right, we are joined now by the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Nigeria, Angel de Conge Atagana, and also joining us via Skype perhaps later is another guest. Many thanks for joining us, Angel. I hope we pronounce your name correctly. All right, the figures.
That's all right.
Indeed. The figures are staggering when it comes to malnutrition and some other vices that the UN has come up to help Nigeria with. But what would you say your scorecard has been over the years as a development partner?
Well, thank you first for having us. I wanted to echo the fact that yesterday, the 24th of October, was the UN Day, the day when the UN was turning 71 years of existence. Today is the day of the UN personnel. Throughout the years, for decades, we have been busy in Nigeria supporting the respective government with development initiative, and more or less lately, we have also been called upon to support in humanitarian front, especially in the Northeast, where, as you have been saying, indeed, there are close to 2 million persons who are displaced, including children suffering from all shortcomings, from all limitations, including food, and scarcity of livelihood and health support is also a problem. And so we are all busy trying to address those matters. We should say that Nigeria has been doing very well, albeit many challenges. So the magnitude of the situation is such that it calls upon international solidarity. The international community has to come to aid because the issues are really challenging and they are of a magnitude that outstrip the capacity of any given entity. Over to you.
Let me come to you this way. We know that before the formation of the United Nations, the League of Nations was there that did not succeed, and the UN was formed to replace that idea. If you pitch the UN now against the original idea for which it was created, how would you rate the performance and the success story so far over the years?
I think the UN is striving to live up to the expectations that are vested into it. Definitely, as you are well informed, the UN was established in the aftermath of the Second World War, which was fraught with human suffering, violence, complete breach of peace. And so we are an organization, as a successor to the League of Nations, we are an organization that promotes peace and the highest aspirations for human being, for mankind. Indeed, we are striving to see that a peaceful world is living a prosperous life and achieving human dignity across the board. And I should say that although it may not be said that we have succeeded 100%, I definitely should say that thank God the UN exists, because if it didn't exist, I'm not sure where the world would be today. There are conflicts across the world, but UN is busy doing a lot, mostly behind the scenes, to ensure that there is not a total relapse into a global crisis, as it has been the case twice already. So I think to that extent, we definitely have made it. But of course, there is a lot more to be done. The challenges are enormous, and I am calling upon the international community and the national community in Nigeria to join hands in synergies so that we can come about a better world, a better Nigeria for all suffering Nigerians, and achieve through the Sustainable Development Goals that were just adopted 1 year ago, achieve the well-being of Nigerians across the country.
All right, let's come to specifics now. Let's take one issue after the other as it concerns Nigeria, the issue of governance and democracy. Some people have given the UN a thumbs up in that regard. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree that the UN has some job to play. We have notably UNDP and other agencies that are busy assisting Nigeria for good governance, including in fighting the corruption, which has been decided by the president of this country to be a top priority. During the election last year, we did a lot. Many of us, many agencies were involved with the shuttle diplomacy to ensure that the outcome of the election will be fair, transparent, and accepted by all stakeholders, which indeed have happened. We did a lot in that, although we didn't say it very loudly. We did a lot in terms of involving the internally displaced persons into the polls, educating them as to how they have to participate in the polls so that they would not be further disenfranchised. We did a lot in terms of involving women into the polls. So yes, UN is doing a lot in terms of good governance, albeit with shortcomings still, but it is a work in progress, and I think it is a work for all of us to do to ensure that we have the Nigeria we want, a Nigeria which is prosperous, which is equitably distributing its wealth amongst all its children. This is the aspiration of which the UN is indeed carrying forward.
All right, Angel, you talked about women, but certainly I'm going to come back to the agenda for women on the United Nations table. But the point is, let's give our viewers some information in here. United Nations Day, first celebrated in 1948, is devoted to making known the aims and achievements of the organization. Now, United Nations Day is part of UN's week, which runs from 20th to 26th October.
The idea around the United Nations were developed in the last years of World War II, as Angel particularly mentioned, particularly during the UN Conference on International Organization in San Francisco in 1945. The UN was officially created by 51 countries when a UN Charter was ratified on October 24 that year.
Now, it is expected to draw attention to the works, achievements, and roles performed by the UN and its specialized agencies. Now, the UN Day this year will highlight concrete actions people can take to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll be talking about as we get along. Now, some of which are meant to bring an end to poverty, end hunger and food insecurity, enhance quality education, promote gender equality, and talk about the availability of clean water and sanitation, economic growth, infrastructure development, combat climate change, and alternative energy.
The specialized agencies include the World Health Organization, WHO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, International Labour Organization, ILO, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and United Nations Human Rights Council.
Even besides this, there are some other agencies that are also affiliated to the UN worldwide. Now, the UN has a lot of functions, but some of the key ones are to maintain international peace and security, promote sustainable development and protecting human rights, upholding international law, and delivering humanitarian aid. Now, the UN has 6 main organs, and they are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat.
All right, let's bring Angel back in here. One of your prong has to do with the development, and I'd like to take you to the issue of all-inclusive growth as a bane in Nigeria. You alluded to that earlier. Can you tell us, I know I've been part of some advocacy group where you talk about poverty and ending it and making a growth inclusive. But in terms of reality of the work that's been done by the UN, it's not really translating to much result. Why is that?
Thank you for that question. You first have to acknowledge the fact that UN is an international organization, meaning it is an organization that was established by member states, and the member states are indeed those who actually, if you wish, to some extent set the tones through the specific institutions you have mentioned. And in that regard, we come to any given country based on the call from that country. We are accredited to the country to come and support the programs or projects that such country is putting in place in order to achieve a number of objectives. Of course, we do intervene, we do work hand in hand, especially since the agreement that the UN should mostly work as one, deliver as one. We work through the framework that we call the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, which is an integrated framework through which we endeavor to align with the priorities of the given state. And in so doing, we agree on the specific expertise and technical support that we are to bring on board in order for the goals agreed upon between ourselves and the country, the government, to be achieved. And so in Nigeria, we have been doing just that. You may know that UNDAF 3 is to end next year, and we are already busy working on UNDAF 4, which is to cover the period 2018-2022. And in that, there are a number of programs, projects, including those aiming at precisely reducing, alleviating the poverty, and ensuring that the programs that are implemented are including, indeed, all the segments of the population. It may not have been thus far very successful for two reasons. I should say that the task is enormous. It may not happen overnight. It has to be a work in progress. But definitely, I think we can say that we have been part of those who have been pushing that the gender agenda has to be upheld, meaning that so long as Nigeria would continue to ignore or not utilize to the maximum possible one great segment of its population, i.e. the women, to the fullest extent, it may not be able to reach the expected outputs in terms of development yields. And so this agenda is on course, and you also know that the current government has it very much on top of on the table. We also are specifically advocating for the youth to be included, involved in all the programs that are targeting or that are having an impact on them, so that indeed, and in as much as they represent the future of the country, they must have a say in what is being decided and how the business is being conducted. Currently, unfortunately, there is recession. Recession is also not limited to Nigeria, by the way. It is also, I would say, a global matter to a good extent. And so Nigeria is facing a number of challenges now, but we do have the confidence that with all the potential human resources, material resources, the natural wealth, and if Nigeria insists on or persists on diversifying its economy, which is very much being talked about and being implemented to a good extent, I think we believe that Nigeria would stand great chances for making it in the years to come.
All right, Angel, we're certainly going to come back to you. Let's reel out more information about the United Nations. The UN has had 9 secretaries general since it was founded, and they are Trive Lai from Norway. He was the Secretary General from 1946 to 1952. We have Dag Hammarskjöld from Sweden. He was from 1953 to 1961. U Thant from Myanmar from 1961 to 1971. We had Kurt Wildheim from Austria. He was Secretary General from 1972 to 1981. We had Javier Perez da Cula from Peru. He was on from 1982 to 1991. We had Boutros Ghali from Egypt. He was from 1992 to 1996. And then we had Kofi Annan from Ghana, who was the Secretary General from 1997 to 2006. And currently we have Ban Ki-moon, and he is from the Republic of Korea from 2007 to the end of this year, and we now have a new Secretary General elect. He is from Portugal, and he will take over the reins from 2017 until going forward.
Yeah, he was the former Prime Minister, really,
of Portugal,
and has been the UN coordinator in terms of humanitarian issues. So
let's listen to the new UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on his agenda as he assumed office.
The lack of peace is the most dramatic problem we are facing in today's world. We have seen a multiplication of new conflicts. Old conflicts never die. Look at Somalia or Afghanistan or the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the world has changed. There is a feeling of impunity and predictability. The international community has lost much of its capacity to prevent conflicts and to solve them. And so a surge in the diplomacy for peace would be my priority. I am not a woman, I'm sorry. What I can do is to make sure that for the organization, first of all, in everything we do around the world, the empowerment and the protection of women and girls is a central priority. And second, that we work inside the organization to reach parity between men and women at all levels in the nearest possible future. So, as I said, I cannot do anything about my gender, but I can have a very strong commitment to gender equality in everything related to the United Nations.
All right, you just heard from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General designate, and talking about his agenda going forward as he takes office soon. Now, let's go back to Angel in our Abuja studio. Now, one of the points the Secretary General designate mentioned there is what you earlier talked about, the gender agenda. Now, he was talking about the issue of pushing the agenda for women and girls. Let's break it down to the specifics. Now, what is the original agenda of the United Nations for Women when it comes to putting women out there, at the same time understanding the peculiarities of women in their various places when it comes to their culture and their religion? How are all of this interfacing or playing together?
Thank you for that. First of all, a point of correction. Mr. Guterres was just until the 31st of December the High Commissioner for Refugees. My own boss. He is the one who appointed me here some 5 years ago. And so he has led UNHCR for almost 11 years before he moved to contest the position of Secretary General. So we very much have hope that he will deliver on the high expectations that are placed on him. Regarding the gender agenda with the UN, I think we should also first acknowledge that the UN is this organization that strives hard to ensure that the diversity is really prevailing across the board. It can be gender, it can be religious belief, it can be, you name it. And so I have seen from what the Secretary General designate has started to do with UNHCR, really as much as possible promoting gender equality in decision-making position in the organization. And I know, for one, that with the existence of UN Women, it is definitely in view of enforcing the agenda for gender equality. And I know that, be it the current Secretary General, the ones before him, most of them have really had it on high on the agenda to ensure that what we preach to countries, i.e., that if they continue to neglect a good part of their population, it would not be possible to ensure equitable development or prosperity.
All right, Angel, thank you. Let me put you on hold a little bit.
So we are trying to live up to that.
Angel, let me put you on hold a little bit there before we come back. We're going out on TVC Entertainment. Our viewers there can continue with the TVC Breakfast on TVC Nigeria, Concert Channel 190 and DSTV Channel 418.
Go TV 45 and SCTV, it is still 510. Let's continue the conversation there.
Right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast, and on this segment we are discussing the United Nations. It's been the United Nations week, and we're talking about the different areas they have affected people, and the expectation from people, and the perception generally across parts of Africa and even Nigeria specifically. And we have in our Abuja studio the UN resident coordinator in Nigeria, Angel Dikonge and Tangana. We've been discussing this. Now, before we go, let's give people more information here. Nigeria is a member of the United Nations, and the country has recently served a 2-year term as a temporary member of the United Nations Security Council from 2014 to 2015.
That is probably the biggest position the country has occupied as a member state of the United Nations. But Nigeria remains one of the biggest beneficiaries of grants and aid from the UN. Let's examine the United Nations and one of its most important and powerful organ, the UN Security Council.
Now, the UN Security Council has 5 permanent members, also known as the Big Five, or P5 as the case may be. They include the following: the 5 governments, that's in China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, as well as the United States. Now, the members represent the 5 great powers considered the victors of World War II. Each of the permanent members has the power to veto, enabling them to prevent the adoption of any substantive draft council resolution, regardless of the level of international support for the draft.
The Security Council also consists of 10 non-permanent members elected for 2-year terms by the General Assembly with end term date. A state which is a member of the United Nations, but not all the Security Council may participate without the vote in its discussion when the Council considers that country's interests are affected.
Now, these are the current 10 members: Angola, Egypt, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Senegal, Spain, Ukraine, Uruguay, and Venezuela.
All right. So, Angel, really, the question is the Security Council. But I'd like to situate the particular problems before I ask the question. The war going on in the Northeast, the war against insurgency going on in the Northeast. You compare the attention that has from the international community with the war going on in Syria, for instance. I don't think there's any day that goes by without hearing the word Aleppo. Yes. And a lot of commitments going to that particular part of the divide. Why is that?
That's a big question, and pardon me if I would be a little passionate about it. Let me tell you this. I came to this country mid-2012. As I underwent what you could call an induction tour, I kept hearing about Nigeria being a development case. This was the rhetoric across the board, starting from Nigerians themselves, the authorities, the stakeholders, getting to the donor country, the international community, including in the UN, among ourselves. We regarded Nigeria solely as a development case. Meanwhile, the flood, the very exceptional flood that evolved through from July to November that year, had to really hit Nigeria very hard, making, causing loss in lives, causing enormous displacement. More than 2 million persons were also displaced by those floods. Segments of roads were washed away. We witnessed all of that on TV, and so much was lost into that flood. And so it was, this for me was the first indication that, albeit being a development case, Nigeria could well begin to sink onto a humanitarian situation. And this indeed, with the conflict in the Northeast assuming more significance and gaining more momentum, became a reality. And so by the time I came, I was one of the very few who could see through the situation in Nigeria that it was no longer only a development case, but definitely we needed to see and position ourselves vis-a-vis the humanitarian situation, which, by the way, was really getting dire day after day and really was obtaining and causing a lot of suffering, including displacements, the malnutrition we know today, shortage in food. That area was already subject to some food insecurity, as we all know. So it took a long while to convince stakeholders that they should stop regarding or looking at Nigeria through the sole lens of development. They should definitely, from there on, start looking at Nigeria as a place where there is also a humanitarian situation obtaining on ground, and that we all, across the board, government, international community, UN included, we needed to begin to position ourselves to ensure that we can cater for the humanitarian needs that were more and more surfacing on ground. And this is what has been going on. Now, as we are speaking, the rhetoric has completely changed. There has been an acknowledgement across the board by all stakeholders that Nigeria indeed is not only a development case, but also a humanitarian case. And by the way, the two situations may actually just be two faces of the same coin, if you wish, in my humble view. And so it is really a good development. And from there on, we have all embarked on a process of ramping up our capacity in order to give ourselves the means to tackle the humanitarian situation that has been on ground. Probably that if you had listened to the news or to watch the news some 2 years ago, you would have seen very much, very little, I would say, about the humanitarian situation in the Northeast or elsewhere. But today, you are seeing it more and more. We at the UN really embarked on a serious advocacy campaign to tell the world that, look, you need to hear the story of Nigeria. We organized side events in New York, in the margins of the UNGA last year. This year, we organize others in other capitals, in Geneva, in the margin of our own UNHCR EXCOM there. We organize a high-level event to tell the world that in as so much as you may want to look at Nigeria as a development case, you really need to acknowledge the sizable humanitarian situation that has developed on ground and that really needs our utmost attention. Like now.
Very good explanation.
Otherwise, so many lives are being lost and so much is being caused. Yes.
Very good explanation there, but some people have some divergent views that the reason you hear more of Aleppo is because it has an ally in Russia. Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council. And of course, when it comes to tackling each other, you have Russia and US, both of them going head to head. When it comes to Aleppo and Syria, that's why it's more noisy than some other perhaps considered lesser conflicts.
I think I'm losing you. I have lost you.
All right, my question is, some people have the opinion that the reason you hear more of Aleppo, or the reason international communities are more committed to the war in Syria, for instance, is because it has an ally in Russia. And Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council. And you remember the war, the Cold War going on between Russia and US, both of them members, permanent members of the Security Council. And these other countries who are not permanent members perhaps do not have a say.
I am losing the last bit. Anyway, I grasped the beginning of your question, and I definitely want to reassure you that far from me, I wouldn't deny the fact that geopolitics play a great role in the world and including the functioning of the UN. That's just a fact. But the true story of Nigeria is really what I am telling you from now on, and I've actually since at least 2014, when the UN, indeed, at the behest of the UN country team here, established a special committee on Nigeria to oversee the situation and the issues and to see how together we can tackle them. I can promise you that there has been more of talking about Nigeria, and it is going to get more and more momentum, definitely, because by now most of the stakeholders are agreeing that Nigeria is a crisis. The ERC, our ERC, Mr. O'Brien, said it last year during the World Humanitarian Summit that Nigeria was probably the most neglected conflict or crisis in the world. And so I think the acknowledgement is getting there. Obviously, geopolitics will continue to play their own role, but I think we also have our share to do, and we'd have to acknowledge that we did not speak loud about the situation in Nigeria from the onset, starting by our own self.
All right, Angel, let me ask you, let's narrow this down to Africa and Nigeria. You talked about Nigeria. We know that the conflict with Boko Haram has been on for some time. It's almost like the same conflict or challenges in Somalia. It's the same thing in South Sudan. It's the same thing in Mali. It's the same thing in parts of Congo and across the entire continent. But how challenging is it for UN to stamp out some of these security challenges that have been running for years, sometimes even for decades?
It is indeed very challenging. And you know, as the head of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees office in Nigeria, I'm definitely well placed to talk about that. To say that by now, as I'm speaking, we have close to 70 million persons who have been forced out of their home, be it outside completely of their home country or within their home country, but outside of their area of origin. And 17 million, this is bigger than UK, bigger than France, bigger in terms of population. This is huge as a magnitude. And that is where I'm very confident that the Secretary General designate is really going to stand a fair chance, a great chance to make some difference in this situation, because he knows it too well. Already last year, he was telling the world that we have reached a turning point. It can no longer continue, no matter how much we are willing to put into alleviating the suffering of those who are displaced, of those who are destitute. It never will be enough if we don't resolutely embark on addressing the root causes of displacement, the root causes of war, which are poverty, which are climate change, which are inequity in distribution of wealth, which are all none. And so the international community, and Nigeria included, need to resolutely embark on addressing those root causes of the conflict. And speaking as an African, I also do believe that it is not a national community, and Nigeria included, need to resolutely embark on addressing those root causes of the conflict. And speaking as an African, I also do believe that it is not, it is too easy to look at the UN. The UN is a global entity which works to assist the state in their different objectives, achieving their different objectives. But we as African, we also need to embark more and more on, trying to tackle our own responsibilities, our own matters. We have to shoulder our responsibility more seriously in the continent to ensure that those crises of the Sudan, of the Somalia, of the, you name them, that have been lingering on, we can come about an end to them. And Nigeria is a big, a big chunk in Africa. I believe that sitting here in Nigeria, and this has been the reason why I literally have been campaigning for Nigeria to be aided in order to be placed on the right track, because I believe Nigeria is too big in this part of the world to be left to fail. Nigeria cannot fail, or else it might be the failure of the whole continent, and probably the world would sustain the will feel the consequences of a failing of Nigeria. And that's why I am saying, sitting here, we really need, as Africans, as mankind, to join hands in synergy to help Nigeria face its challenges, because they are enormous and there is a potential for such challenges to be overcome. It only takes a resolve for all of us to work together, achieving the same objectives, i.e. lasting peace in Africa, in Nigeria, lasting peace for prosperous living of the population in true human dignity. This is really what I can say in this regard.
All right, Angel Antangana, UN Resident Coordinator in Nigeria. Thanks for talking to us on the TVC Breakfast.